Have you ever spoken a prayer so powerful that heaven seemed to listen too closely? A prayer that felt pure, holy, full of love, until everything in your life began to change. Most of us think prayer is always safe, a gentle conversation with God, a refuge for the weary heart. But Saint Teresa of Avila, the mystic of the inner castle, warned her daughters that some prayers are not for everyone. She said there are words so sacred, so weighty in the language of heaven, that when you say them with sincerity, you invite God to reshape your entire soul. Not symbolically, not softly, but through real experiences, through trials, contradictions, and sometimes a silence that feels unbearable. She called them dangerous prayers, not because they harm, but because they awaken. They awaken a sleeping soul, and call it into the deepest transformation. Have you ever whispered something like, "Lord, make me humble," or "Lord, let me share in your suffering"? Saint Teresa said these are the words that shake the foundations of heaven. When you say them, the Lord does not send a gentle breeze. He sends a purifying fire. He doesn't give you a lesson in humility. He gives you the opportunity to live it. In her time, many of her sisters would pray these same words, and soon find themselves misunderstood, criticized, or stripped of what they loved most. Yet in the midst of their tears, a strange peace would begin to grow, a peace that no comfort had ever given them. In the next moments, we'll uncover the very prayer Saint Teresa warned her sisters to speak only with caution, why she called it dangerous, and how it can transform not just your mind, but your entire destiny. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why heaven listens so carefully to a soul brave enough to pray these words. Before we reveal the words that Saint Teresa warned about, you need to understand who she was, because her warning didn't come from fear, but from experience paid for with tears. Teresa of Avila was not a saint of sweet visions and easy piety. She was a woman of fire, born with a strong will and a restless heart. From her youth, she desired greatness, not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. Yet her path was never smooth. She suffered illnesses so severe that her family thought she had died. She faced misunderstanding from her confessors, opposition from her own sisters, and temptations that tore her spirit between heaven and earth. Through it all, she learned something most of us spend a lifetime avoiding: that real union with God doesn't come through comfort, but through surrender. One night, in the stillness of her cell, Teresa knelt before the crucifix and whispered, "Lord, either let me suffer, or let me die." It wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of love. She wanted to love Christ so completely that even his cross would become her joy. Heaven heard her. From that moment, her life changed. What followed was a storm of purification. She was mocked, doubted, accused, and at times felt abandoned even by God himself. But through every trial, she discovered a deeper peace, a love that no suffering could steal. Teresa later told her nuns, "Be careful what you ask for, because God takes you at your word." This wasn't a warning meant to scare them. It was a mother's wisdom, the wisdom of someone who had already walked through the fire and found God waiting on the other side. She knew that when the soul asks for humility, heaven responds not with compliments, but with crosses that purify pride. When the soul asks for love, heaven responds with opportunities to forgive. When the soul asks for union with Christ, heaven often responds with the cross of Christ. Saint Teresa lived this truth not as theory, but as reality, and it was out of mercy that she cautioned others not to stay away from such prayers, but to understand what they truly mean. Because when you speak them, you are no longer asking for blessings. You are asking to become a blessing. And that transformation always comes at a cost. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the exact words Teresa warned about, the ones that opened heaven's door so wide that her soul was forever changed. The words themselves are simple. They don't sound mystical, or secret, or even extraordinary. But in heaven's language, simplicity often hides the deepest power. Saint Teresa of Avila revealed them in her writings and to her sisters. "Lord, grant me humility," and "Lord, let me share in your suffering." Two prayers that seem innocent, even beautiful, but she warned that to speak them with sincerity is to open a door that will never close again. Why? Because these words do not merely ask for blessings. They ask for transformation. And transformation always requires fire. When you pray for humility, God does not make you feel humble. He allows you to be humbled. He lets situations arise that challenge your pride. Misunderstandings, rejections, failures. Moments when your image is stripped bare. Not to destroy you, but to free you from illusions about yourself. When you pray to share in Christ's suffering, He does not simply give you compassion. He draws you closer to His heart. A heart pierced, misunderstood, abandoned, and asks if you still wish to love Him there. These are the prayers that heaven always answers, because they ask for the very thing God desires most, that we become like His Son. But Teresa insisted that such prayers must be spoken consciously, not as pious words, but as an act of surrender. She told her sisters, when you ask for humility, prepare yourself for the path that leads to it. And that path is never the one we would choose for ourselves. There were times when Teresa prayed these very words, and soon found herself stripped of every comfort. Her reputation attacked, her body weak, her spirit thrown into deep interior silence. She once said, "When the Lord wishes to purify the soul, He withdraws all sweetness and leaves only Himself." This is what happens when we invite heaven to take us seriously. We stop being spectators of holiness and become participants in it. We begin to live the gospel not as a story, but as our own heartbeat. So if you've ever felt that your prayers led you into hardship, don't assume you were abandoned. Perhaps you were being answered. Perhaps God was giving you the very thing you asked for, the grace to be made real. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into what Saint Teresa called the test of the soul, the moment when heaven begins to shape you through the very things you once begged Him to take away. Saint Teresa said that when a soul prays for humility or for the cross, it begins a journey that very few understand, because the first answer heaven gives doesn't look like a blessing, it looks like loss. The saint called this moment the test of the soul. It's the point where prayer becomes reality, where what we say with our lips is measured by the truth of our heart. She once wrote, "When we ask the Lord for virtue, He does not grant it immediately, but gives opportunities to practice it. So when you pray for patience, He sends delays. When you pray for humility, He allows misunderstandings. When you ask for pure love, He may place someone in your path who is difficult to love. And when this happens, we often think God has turned away. But Saint Teresa knew better. She understood that God's silence is not absence, it is formation. She told her nuns, the soul that truly loves must be ready to bear the weight of love itself. These trials are not punishments. They are proofs of friendship. The Lord allows the soul to taste the cost of love, so that it may also taste its depth. Think of gold. When it is placed in fire, it doesn't perish, it is purified. The same is true of the heart that belongs to God. The flames reveal what is false and strengthen what is true. Teresa herself lived through this refinement. She endured spiritual dryness so deep that for years she felt unable to pray. And yet she wrote, "Even when I cannot feel God, I know that He is closer than ever." This is the paradox of the test. When the soul feels most abandoned, it is often most loved, because only those deeply loved by God are invited into His silence. If you've ever felt that your prayers opened a storm instead of peace, don't give up. You may be in the same sacred fire that once purified a saint. Teresa said, "The Lord proves His friends through trials, and those who endure them with faith will soon taste His sweetness more than ever before." The test of the soul is not to see if God loves you. It's to see if you love Him. When there is nothing left to gain and everything to surrender. In the next chapter, we'll uncover what Teresa discovered inside that suffering, the hidden blessing that blooms in the heart once the fire of the test has done its work. Saint Teresa of Avila often said that suffering is not the enemy of the soul, forgetfulness of God is. She did not glorify pain, nor did she chase after it. But she knew that when pain is offered to God with love, it becomes something mysterious and beautiful, a hidden seed of transformation. She once wrote, "The greatest grace the Lord can give a soul is to send it suffering for His sake." To her, This wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was the lived reality of a woman who discovered that pain and peace can dwell together in the same heart. When the storms came, when she was criticized, mocked, and even forbidden to found her convents, Teresa didn't lose hope. She said quietly, "I am content, because I know whose hand is guiding everything." She believed that suffering reveals the truth of love. As she explained to her sisters, when everything external is taken away, you finally discover whether your love for God was real or only a feeling. She would tell them, "Love is not proven in sweetness, but in perseverance." And this is where the hidden blessing appears. In the midst of humiliation, the soul learns humility. In the midst of loss, it learns detachment. In the silence of unanswered prayers, it learns faith. Teresa compared suffering to rain that falls on the garden of the soul. She said that while it can feel cold and heavy at first, it nourishes the deepest roots of virtue. Without it, nothing lasting can grow. She even called trials the jewels of the soul, because they shine most brightly when polished by tears. For Teresa, every pain endured with love became an offering, a silent prayer that spoke louder than words. It was not about seeking pain, but about transforming it into communion. She wrote, "When we suffer with joy, we carry the cross with Christ, and He carries us upon His shoulders." This is the secret she longed for her daughters to understand, that suffering accepted in love does not imprison the soul. It liberates it. Because when you no longer flee from the cross, you discover that the cross itself hides the embrace of God. In the next chapter, we'll explore what Saint Teresa called the consequences of holiness. What begins to happen within the soul when it no longer fears the cost of love, and finally learns to trust the will of God in everything. When Saint Teresa spoke about holiness, she never described it as a reward, but as a consequence, the natural outcome of loving God so deeply that nothing else can compete. She said, "Holiness is not in great deeds, but in great love. And great love always leaves traces." Those who dared to pray her dangerous prayer, those who truly said, "Lord, make me humble," and meant it, found themselves slowly changed from within. At first, they felt stripped, disoriented, as if God had taken everything they relied on. But then something remarkable began to happen. A quiet freedom emerged. A freedom from the endless need to be right, to be admired, to be understood. They began to see themselves clearly. Small, imperfect, loved. And that truth set them free. Saint Teresa said, "True humility does not consist in thinking little of ourselves, but in forgetting ourselves entirely." This is one of the greatest paradoxes of holiness. When the self finally stops seeking itself, it becomes radiant. You can feel it in truly humble people. They don't draw attention to themselves, yet you can't look away. There is peace in their presence, a calm that speaks louder than sermons. That is what Teresa meant when she said that humility is the foundation of the spiritual life. Without it, even the most dazzling gifts collapse. With it, everything flourishes. And then there's the second prayer. "Lord, let me share in your suffering." To those who dare to pray it, Teresa said, "The Lord does not ask you to seek pain, but to embrace love wherever it leads." She discovered that once the soul stops fearing the cross, it becomes light. Suffering no longer has the power to crush it. It becomes a doorway into divine intimacy. When the soul finally says yes to God, without conditions, something eternal awakens within it. Joy takes the place of fear. Peace replaces anxiety. And every circumstance, even difficulty, becomes a meeting place with God. That is the true consequence of holiness. Freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of ego. Freedom from bitterness. Freedom to love purely. To love because He is worthy, not because life is easy. Teresa told her nuns, "The hand that wounds is the same hand that heals." And when you finally trust that hand completely, you stop bargaining with heaven. You no longer say, "Take this away." You say, "Use it for your glory." That's when the soul begins to live. Not in resistance, but in radiant surrender. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how Saint Teresa taught her daughters to recognize when they were ready to pray these sacred words. And what signs reveal that the heart has matured enough to bear their power? Saint Teresa never told her sisters to fear holy words. She simply taught them to prepare their hearts before speaking them. Because to say, "Lord, make me humble," or "Lord, let me share in your suffering," is to hand the keys of your soul to heaven. And heaven never refuses an open door. She explained that there are certain signs that reveal when a soul is truly ready for this surrender. Not perfect signs, but quiet indicators that God has already begun his work within. The first sign is detachment. When the opinions of others begin to lose their power over you. When you stop living for approval and start seeking truth. You may still feel hurt by misunderstanding, but it no longer defines you. You begin to care more about being right with God than being right with people. Teresa said, "He who possesses God lacks nothing. God alone suffices." The second sign is the desire for purification. When you start longing for inner transformation, more than for outer comfort, you stop praying only for God to fix your circumstances, and start asking Him to change your heart. You begin to see suffering not as punishment, but as a sculptor's tool shaping your soul. Teresa taught, when the Lord wishes to give great graces, He begins by making us desire them deeply. The third sign is love without conditions. This is the highest and most delicate fruit of the spiritual life. It is the moment when your relationship with God no longer depends on what He gives or takes away. When you love Him not for the sweetness of His gifts, but for who He is, you can say, "Lord, even if you hide yourself from me, I will still love you." Teresa called this stage spiritual maturity. It is the place where faith becomes pure, where prayer is no longer a transaction, but communion. If these three signs are beginning to blossom in you, it may be time to whisper those sacred words. Slowly, reverently, knowing that heaven listens with love, but also with precision. Because when you pray this way, you're not asking for miracles outside of you. You're asking for a miracle within you. And that kind of miracle always comes with a cost. The cost of becoming real before God. In the next chapter, we'll walk with Saint Teresa, as she teaches how to pray this prayer safely. Not to summon suffering, but to transform it into the deepest act of love. Saint Teresa of Avila never wanted her daughters to chase suffering. She wanted them to embrace love. She knew that when prayer is pure, it doesn't seek pain. It seeks transformation. That is why she taught a simple, gentle method to pray these dangerous words safely, anchored in faith and protected by trust. She began by saying, never start with fear. Begin with surrender. Before you ask for humility or the cross, pause for a moment. Breathe deeply. Remember that the one you are speaking to is not a harsh judge, but a loving Father. Then whisper the first step, the prayer of surrender. Lord, teach me to love you more than myself. Let that line settle in your heart. It's not a request for trials. It's a request for love. And love will know how to shape you. The second step is the prayer of trust. Do with me whatever will make me yours. When Teresa said these words, her life turned into a dance between joy and suffering, but never without peace. Because she knew that the Lord who purifies is also the Lord who comforts. And the third step is the prayer of peace. Jesus, I trust you, even when I do not understand you. This is the anchor of the soul. It keeps you from mistaking purification for punishment. It reminds you that every fire in your life is held within His mercy. When you pray this way, you're not daring God to test you. You're inviting Him to transform you. You're telling Him, I no longer want to live on the surface. Take me deeper, even if the road is narrow. Teresa used to say that prayer should never be hurried. She told her nuns, it is not thinking much that makes prayer, but loving much. So when you say these words, don't rush them. Let them echo. Feel their weight. Feel their beauty. Say them as she did. Not with fear, but with awe. Because the moment you truly mean them, heaven begins to move. Not against you, but within you. And when you rise from that prayer, don't look for immediate changes. Look for quiet courage. Look for peace in places where you once felt fear. That is how grace begins. Silently. Invisibly. Like dawn after the longest night. In the next chapter, you'll hear how these very words have transformed lives in our own time. Modern souls who discovered, just like Saint Teresa, that the dangerous prayer doesn't destroy. It rebuilds. Centuries may have passed since Saint Teresa walked the cloisters of Avila, but her warning and her wisdom remain as alive as ever. Even today, souls who whisper her dangerous prayer find that heaven still answers with the same mysterious precision. A woman once wrote to our community, "I asked God to make me humble. Within a week, I lost my position at work. My pride was crushed, and I wept bitterly. But in those tears, I discovered a peace I had never known. I began to see how much I had depended on praise, and for the first time in years, I felt free." Another soul, a young man in search of purpose, shared this. "I prayed to share in Christ's suffering. Not long after, my closest friend betrayed me. It broke me. But through that heartbreak, I met God again. He was there, not in the comfort, but in the wound itself." These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of grace. Proof that the same divine hand that guided the saint still shapes the lives of those who dare to love deeply. There was also an elderly nun from Spain who practiced Saint Teresa's teachings every day. When illness confined her to bed for years, she used to say, smiling softly, "I asked the Lord to make me His. He took me at my word." Her face, though lined with pain, radiated a serenity that words could never describe. This is the paradox of the dangerous prayer. It doesn't bring chaos. It brings clarity. It removes what is false so that only love remains. Saint Teresa's own words echo across time. When a soul truly gives itself to God, the Lord begins to treat it as His friend. And friendship with God costs dearly. But the cost is nothing compared to the reward. Because those who surrender everything receive what can never be taken away. The peace of knowing that their lives belong completely to Love Himself. If you have prayed these words and felt life unravel around you, take heart. Perhaps it isn't falling apart. Perhaps it's falling into place. For Teresa, every humiliation, every loss, every trial wasn't evidence of God's absence, but proof of His presence. The fire was His signature. And if you listen closely, you might hear that same gentle voice whisper to you now, "Do not fear what I allow. It is not punishment. It is preparation." In the next chapter, we'll step into the final invitation. The moment when Saint Teresa calls each of us to make the choice she made, to stop praying for an easier life and start praying for a braver heart. Are you ready to pray as the saints prayed? To stop asking God to make life easier and start asking Him to make your heart stronger? This is the question Saint Teresa of Avila leaves for every soul who listens. She does not promise comfort. She promises truth. Because holiness is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of love that outlasts it. When you reach this point of the journey, something inside you shifts. You no longer beg God to remove the cross. You begin to thank Him for trusting you to carry it. You realize that every humiliation, every disappointment, every moment that once felt like loss, has been a quiet lesson in divine intimacy. Teresa used to tell her nuns, "The Lord walks among the pots and pans," meaning, holiness is not found in visions or ecstasies alone. It is found in the ordinary trials of everyday life. In the patience we show, the love we choose, the surrender we offer. So tonight, if your soul feels heavy, if your prayers have gone unanswered, if you are standing in that mysterious silence where heaven feels distant, this is your invitation. Whisper with faith, "Lord, make me humble. Lord, make me like you." And then let go. Because from that moment on, your life will no longer belong to fear. It will belong to love. Saint Teresa's dangerous prayer is not about suffering for suffering's sake. It's about freedom. Freedom from pride, from self, from the illusions that keep us far from God. When you finally dare to love without conditions, you enter the heart of the gospel itself. The world may not understand, but heaven rejoices. She once said, "Let nothing trouble you. Let nothing frighten you. All things pass. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. He who has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices." This is her legacy. Not fear, not pain, but fearless peace. So if your heart is whispering yes, Don't silence it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Begin now. Because every moment of surrender is a new doorway to grace. In the final chapter, we'll offer a blessing and an invitation to walk this journey together as souls of the inner castle, united by love and guided by the same fire that burned in Saint Teresa's heart. You've walked through the mystery of Saint Teresa's warning. You've seen how a few simple words, spoken with sincerity, can awaken heaven, reshape the soul, and draw a person into the deepest friendship with God. But this journey doesn't end here. In truth, it is only beginning. Saint Teresa didn't want her teachings to remain within cloistered walls. She wanted them to reach every searching heart. Hearts like yours, longing for something more real than comfort, something more lasting than success. She believed that every soul is an inner castle, built by God, filled with rooms of light, and waiting to be explored. But the key to enter that castle is love, and the door to its deepest chamber is opened by surrender. If tonight you feel the quiet stirring of that surrender, let it move you. Don't resist it. Don't overthink it. Simply whisper, "Lord, I am yours. Teach me to love as you love." That is the prayer that changed Saint Teresa's life. And it can change yours too. And now, before we close, I want to leave you with her own blessing. A prayer she often spoke to her sisters. May the Lord be with you within you. May He never leave your side. And may His love be your rest and your strength. If this message has touched your heart, don't let it fade when the video ends. Carry it into your day, into your family, into every moment that feels ordinary or difficult. Because that is where holiness begins. In the quiet places, in the hidden choices, in the unseen yes whispered to God. And if you wish to keep walking this path, the path of the inner castle, I invite you to join our spiritual family here at Light of the Inner Castle. Subscribe and let us continue discovering together the wisdom of the saints and the beauty of a life fully given to God. Share this video with someone who needs courage to pray again. And in the comments, write these words as a living prayer. Lord, give me courage to love as Teresa loved. Because when many souls unite in one desire for holiness, the world itself begins to change. May Saint Teresa of Avila intercede for you. May her fire become your peace. And may every cross in your life become the doorway through which love enters. Remember always, God never asks you to be perfect, only to be willing. For the soul that is willing, even suffering becomes glory. May the peace of Christ dwell in your heart tonight. And may the light of the inner castle guide you ever closer to Him who is love itself.